I'm going to turn over the presentation to Rudy Sanchez from Mount SAC. He's going to be sharing with us tonight a wealth of information in regards to financial aid. So thank you for joining us tonight, Rudy. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
Sounds good. Well, hello, everyone. I hope the audio levels are all right. Thank you, Mrs. Hanson. Thank you, South Hills High School, for the invitation. It's a joy to join you all virtually this evening. As Mrs. Hanson mentioned, there's this whole college application process, and it's exactly that. It's a process. There are many things involved, one of which, of course, is the application for financial aid. That is certainly an important aspect of this whole college-going process. As you all understand, going to college will come at a cost, right? There are various expenses you'll have to plan for. The good news, though, is that there are a range of financial aid options available to help make college a reality. And I hope that that is one takeaway that you all have from our time together, is that college is attainable. Education beyond high school is attainable. It is a possibility, especially because there is opportunities to connect with financial aid resources. I'll work right now on sharing my screen so that we can get started with the presentation. So bear with me as I accustom myself with a Google Meet here. I'm not as used to using this tool, but I'm sure I'll figure it out. Let's see.
Rudy, down at the bottom, there's a Present Now button, and it'll ask you if you want to present what you want to present. There you go.
Yes. So you should be
Yep,
seeing my screen. All right.
We can see your screen. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. Now, we are scheduled this evening until 8 p.m. That should give us more than enough time to get through this presentation, and we should have between 20 to 30 minutes at the end for some Q&A. It's definitely my goal to always have sufficient time for that Q&A. I know with financial aid, especially if you've never gone through this process, maybe it's your first time, or it's maybe been a while. Parents, maybe you've had other kids go through college but a few years ago. It can seem quite daunting and cumbersome. So I know that there are a lot of questions, and I definitely want to answer as many as possible. We do have quite a wealth of information to cover, which means we do need to move at a brisk pace, all right? But we will have between 20 to 30 minutes, once again, for some Q&A. Let's just get started. As you can see, we do have various topics of discussion that we are going to learn together and review. So first of all, we will get started with a basic definition of financial aid. What does it mean to talk about financial aid? We'll have that common understanding of what financial aid is, and then we'll move forward with talking about what types are out there. As we'll learn, there are different types of financial aid, different options to help pay for college. Next, we will talk about how it is that you're applying. Once we've learned about what is financial aid, what are those options, we'll discuss how you can apply to those different financial aid options. We will then get into a section about common mistakes, and these are mistakes you really want to avoid. Okay, so we'll learn about those together and walk through those carefully. Our next point of discussion is something called an expected family contribution. This is a big aspect in terms of your total financial aid eligibility. We'll talk about what that is and, of course, why it's important. Next, we'll discuss what's termed the student aid report. This is going to be a very good resource for you. Once you complete your application, we'll talk more about that. And we will conclude our time about what happens next, more or less. What can you expect after you've completed your financial aid application? And woven in and out throughout this presentation, we have what we're terming Mountie Myths. So it's like a little segment about common myths about financial aid. Working in the financial aid office for some time now, it's very common that we hear certain assumptions about financial aid, and usually these are assumptions that are just not true. Okay, so this is a kind of separating fact from fiction, myth-busting kind of thing. So we'll learn about those myths as we go through this presentation together. Now let's get started with that first point of discussion. What is financial aid? What does that term mean? Put simply, financial aid, it's just money to help you pay for college. At its most basic, that is what it boils down to, money to help you pay for college. Oftentimes students think financial aid is only the free money, but financial aid can be a loan. It can be employment, and we'll talk more about that. But financial aid, it's just money to help you pay for college. As mentioned earlier, going to college will come at a cost. There are different expenses that you will have to plan to pay for. Things like your classes, tuition, you are charged for your classes. Textbooks, right? School supplies. Potentially you'll need a newer laptop or certain computer software, art supplies, etc. If you're considering living on campus, there's housing costs, maybe a meal plan. There are various expenses, right? Now, the good news is that there is money out there, okay? So there is money available to help you cover those costs. That money will come from different sources, so do keep that in mind. Financial aid will come from various areas. There is money that is offered from the federal government. There is money offered from the state of California. There is even what's called institutional financial aid, and that is money which is offered from the colleges themselves. It's very common that schools, colleges, universities, that they will have financial aid offered to qualifying students, and that is going to be another resource to cover those expenses. And lastly, financial aid can even come from private sources. What do we mean by private sources? We're just talking about organizations, entities that aren't affiliated with the government or with the colleges, the institutions themselves. Think about, for example, your employer, you as the student or your parent. Employers may have scholarship opportunities or tuition assistance programs. It could come from a nonprofit business, maybe a religious organization. So think about your network of contacts. Think about your community. You might have scholarship opportunities there, and that would be financial aid from private sources. So let's now talk about what types of financial aid are available. We've discussed that financial aid, we're just talking about money to help you pay for college, and that money will come from different sources. Let's now take a look at what types of financial aid are available. Generally speaking, financial aid can get categorized into three broad categories. There's first of all the free money, okay? There's the free money, think of it as gift aid, money that's gifted to you. Examples of free money or gift aid are scholarships and grants. These would be financial aid options that don't require repayment. As long as you qualify, then this money is gifted to you, okay? This is free money, and this will help you cover those various expenses. The second type of financial aid is known as earned money. So think of this as employment. You're earning that money through a work obligation, okay? One example of this type of financial aid is the Federal Work-Study Program. This is a financial aid program where your paycheck is basically funded by the federal government. If you do choose to receive federal work-study, then you are acquiring a job, you're fulfilling those work duties, and then you are earning that paycheck. And as mentioned, that paycheck is funded by the Federal Work-Study Program. Obviously, that paycheck is money, right, that you can then use for your different expenses, textbooks, etc. The last type of financial aid is known as borrowed money. Now, this is money that will require repayment. So, of course, exercise caution before you do choose to take out loans. However, one example of borrowed money would be federal loans, and that's really what we're going to focus on during our time together. We'll take a look at federal loan information. There are, of course, private student loans. However, the terms and the conditions of those loans will just vary, okay? It's going to depend on each lender, each bank, for example. And so you would just want to make sure to conduct your research if you choose to borrow a private student loan, and certainly before you would choose to borrow a federal student loan. We will discuss federal loans in more detail shortly. Once again, these are the different types of financial aid that you very well could receive to help you pay for those college costs. The free money, the borrowed money, and the earned money, all right? We're now going to take a look a little more closely into each of these different types. We'll look at the different grant options. We will then discuss scholarship information. Afterwards, we'll get into the Federal Work-Study Program and then federal loans. So let's talk about the free money. As you'll see on the screen, there are a range of grant options. Now, don't feel like you have to memorize this right now. Feel free to take a picture if you'd like to, right? But this is an overview of federal and state grant options. As you can see, the federal government, they do have a couple of grant options known as the Federal Pell Grant and what's termed the Federal Supplemental Opportunity Grant, usually spoken of as FSCOG. The amounts you see as well represent maximum amounts, and these are amounts per school year, all right? This isn't the entire amount you would receive. If you do qualify, this could be an amount, and once again, these are amounts per school year. We'll talk more about this, but with financial aid, you want to make sure to apply every year. You're not going to apply once and that's it. You do need to apply every year for financial aid. We've discussed that the federal government, they do offer those two grant options. The state of California also has a few state grant options made available. There is what's called the California College Promise Grant, or CCPG. Now, this is a unique type of financial aid program in that it will pay for your classes in full. And this is also a financial aid program which is only made available at the California community colleges, which means that you would need to enroll and attend a California community college to receive consideration for this financial aid option. But it's worth noting that if you go to a community college, you could very well have your classes paid for in full by this particular program. Another option from the state of California is a financial aid program known as the Cal Grant. And the Cal Grant is another great resource to help you cover those costs. The amount of Cal Grant you receive will depend on whether you're choosing to enroll at a UC school, a CSU, a private institution, or a community college. So ultimately, that will affect your total award amount, but that could very well be another grant option that you can receive. The state of California also makes available what's called the middle class scholarship. So this would be for higher income families if your income is upwards $100,000, and I think it caps off at about $180,000. But you would be automatically considered for this, and we will talk about the application. But this could also be an opportunity for you, particularly if you're attending a UC school, and I believe that the CSU schools. Lastly, the state of California offers what's called the Student Success Completion Grant. And this is another financial aid program exclusive to the California community colleges. However, students can very well receive this. This particular type of financial aid is offered for students enrolled at a California community college who are also full-time and receiving that Cal Grant. But it's worth noting that there are, as mentioned, a range of grant options. As you can see, the amounts are substantial, and you could very well qualify for multiple of these grant options. So this is all an example of free sources of that financial aid made available to you from the federal and state government. I would like to just add briefly that schools can offer you their own grant money, institutional financial aid. Remember, however, that is going to just depend at each school. The institutional grant options will vary. The eligibility requirements really will be up to each institution. But don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if you find yourself also qualifying for institutional grant options. Let's now talk about scholarships. Remember, this is another example of the free financial aid type, right? At Mount SAC, we're very pleased to have quite a robust scholarship program. And the scholarship information I'm going to share is primarily relevant to our Mount SAC students, but we'll get into what's termed outside scholarships in a bit. At Mount SAC, we do, though, make available quite a large amount of funding. As you can see, over $400,000 is awarded to our students. And on average, students that receive these scholarships would receive between $500 to $1,000. So we have a general application, and we help match students to these different scholarship opportunities. We also do partner with our associated students body, and we make available a book scholarship. So it's even possible to have your books paid for through the scholarship option. And this is a scholarship that doesn't even require an essay. There's just some basic criteria that needs to get met. We also support our students with applying to a very national and prestigious scholarship known as the Jack Kent Cooke Transfer Scholarship. As you can see, there is a large amount of money made available for students who are awarded this scholarship up to $40,000 a year. This would be a scholarship opportunity for students to demonstrate high academic achievement, who show leadership, who also show financial need. Our scholarship team actually helps students apply to this scholarship. They host different workshops, and they will help students develop their portfolio. They provide feedback on any written portion of that application. And we're super excited. We actually did have a Mount SAC student recently awarded this scholarship. This is a national, very competitive scholarship, and we have had students in the past and recently within this last semester awarded this scholarship. So it really speaks to the quality of support that our scholarships team provides, but it also speaks to the importance of applying to scholarship opportunities. Don't sell yourself short. Don't discredit yourself from those scholarship options. And speaking of scholarship options, there really are thousands of scholarship opportunities out there. And I get it. It could be quite overwhelming. You might think, where to begin, or do I really even stand a chance? But you're not going to receive a scholarship if you don't apply. Okay, so just consider that. I would suggest that you at least take a look at scholarship websites. For example, fastweb.com, there's Latino College Dollars, Unigo. What's very useful about these scholarship websites, particularly FastWeb, is that these are large scholarship databases. For example, FastWeb will house thousands of scholarships, and what's very useful is that FastWeb will actually filter scholarships that are perfect matches for you. All right, you're going to create a FastWeb account, and you're not going to provide things like your social or credit card information, but you do provide some information like what program are you going to study, what career interests do you have, what's your ethnicity, what's your age, things like that. And they are then going to target scholarships that fit your profile. So that could really help with your research. And you know what? Just set a realistic goal. I would encourage all of you, just try to apply to a few scholarships a month. I don't feel like with these outside scholarships, don't feel like you have to have this all figured out before you get started. You could literally apply for scholarships throughout the year. With these outside scholarships, these would just be opportunities from every conceivable kind of business and organization. That there are many out there with different deadlines, different requirements. So take a look, try to apply to a few throughout the year. Another thing to consider is try to look around your community. Maybe your high school has scholarship opportunities. Maybe your employer, your parents' employer, if you're involved in a religious or city organization, just take stock of where you're involved. And you never know, there might be some scholarship opportunities. Consider what makes you who you are, right? Consider your major, your career goals, your interests, your background, even your medical conditions. You'd be surprised at how targeted some scholarship opportunities are. So conduct that self-reflection, conduct that self-examination, and take a look to see if there are scholarships that really fit who you are. And of course, just be cautious of scams. You shouldn't be providing things like your social security number, your credit card to apply for a scholarship, or if there's anything that you're just not comfortable providing, maybe just move along. So just be aware of those scams. So let's now talk about the next type of financial aid. We discussed the type of financial aid which is free, right? The gift aid, grants and scholarships. Let's now discuss the type of financial aid which is earned money. Remember, this would be money that you're earning through employment. An example is the Federal Work-Study Program. Often this is an on-campus job that you can apply for, and if you're awarded the job, right, if you get that offer for the job, then you would then earn that paycheck, and this would be funded by the Federal Work-Study Program. In order to receive consideration for this type of financial aid, you do need to apply through the FAFSA application. This is also what's called need-based. Need-based meaning you need to demonstrate financial need as captured on the FAFSA. So don't worry about having to prove that. You just need to complete the FAFSA, and that will be determined. And keep in mind that if you're not offered the Federal Work-Study Program, that doesn't mean that you can never obtain student employment. Colleges likely will still have some positions, some job opportunities that aren't funded by Federal Work-Study. So still consider getting an on-campus job. With working on campus, you're likely going to gain valuable experience. It'll really enhance your overall college-going, right, experience. And you might find yourself working alongside professionals. You might be helping an instructor with research. So it really could be a way to make the most of your time in college. And of course, you're earning that paycheck, right? So that could help cover some of those costs. So lastly, let's talk about borrowed money. Remember, this is the last type of financial aid. We've covered the free money, grant scholarships. We've covered the earned money, Federal Work-Study. The last type of financial aid, remember, financial aid is just money to help you pay for college, and that money could be borrowed money. So this would be a loan. We're going to specifically discuss a federal loan. Now, the first federal loan we will talk about is the subsidized and the unsubsidized federal loan. These loans are available for students. So students, you could receive this federal loan, and this would be a loan that you would eventually have to repay. So of course, just be mindful of that. This requires repayment. Now, don't feel that by you applying for financial aid that you're signing up for the loan or that you're going to be forced to take out this loan. That's not at all the case. Believe me, you have to take some additional steps before you actually receive the federal loan and before you're obligated to pay back this loan. An example of these steps that you would have to complete are as follows. You would have to complete entrance counseling, what's called entrance counseling, and you would also have to complete what's called the master promissory note. Entrance counseling, this is going to be an online tutorial. It's like an online module, and you're learning about the terms and conditions of the loan. And there's a very useful feature to this entrance counseling that is a loan repayment tool. This tool will allow you to estimate how much you plan on borrowing in federal loans, and you will then see exactly what that means in terms of a monthly repayment amount. This is a great way to have a better idea about what you're getting into. You won't have to feel like you don't know what you're signing up for. You can try to estimate, as mentioned, how much you plan to borrow, and then you'll see what that monthly repayment amount looks like. And then the master promissory note, this is actually the legally binding document to the loan. So you will need to complete this. You're basically signing electronically saying you promise to pay back the loan. And so you can't receive the loan unless you do both entrance counseling and the master promissory note. Students can apply for the subsidized and the unsubsidized loan. Let's talk about the difference between those two loans. The subsidized loan is going to be a need-based loan, which means you do need to qualify based on the financial criteria captured on your FAFSA application. And this is a loan that is not going to accrue interest. There's no interest accrual for the subsidized loan as long as you're enrolled at least half time in your program. For example, suppose your first year, suppose you choose to take out $2,000 in the subsidized loan, and suppose it takes you 6 years to finish your bachelor's degree. During that whole 6 years, you have been enrolled at least half time. You haven't taken any breaks, right? Well, once you enter repayment, and repayment for these loans will begin 6 months after you are no longer enrolled half time, whether that means you just stop showing up, maybe you take a few semesters at less than half time, right? But once you're no longer enrolled for half time, you then enter repayment 6 months from that date. So in our example, $2,000 of that subsidized loan takes you 6 years to finish your degree, and you're enrolled full-time that whole time, okay? When you enter repayment, you're still looking at that $2,000. There has been no interest accrual. So that's a huge benefit. That's a huge benefit to the subsidized loan. Let's talk about the unsubsidized loan now. The unsubsidized loan is completely opposite, okay? It's completely opposite. The unsubsidized loan will not be based on you showing financial need. You could literally be making millions and billions of dollars. The finances aren't even a thing for the unsubsidized loan. That's not part of the eligibility criteria. Secondly, the unsubsidized loan will accrue interest. As soon as you receive that funding, the unsubsidized loan will begin to accrue that interest. So just be aware of that. You're not forced to pay the interest while you're in school, but you may want to consider it, especially because that loan amount can definitely grow over time, and you might be then repaying much more than you initially borrowed. So be aware of that. I do also just want to mention that, remember, the loan is a type of financial aid. It is still money to help you pay for those costs, and ultimately it might be a wise investment. Remember, your education, that is an investment in yourself. By going to college and obtaining your certificate, your degree, you're acquiring knowledge, you're acquiring skills that will likely translate to embarking into a career in whatever profession that you're looking to get into. And that might mean that you're making more money, that your earning potential is larger than it would have been had you not gone to school. So it might very well be a good investment, especially if it allows you to finish your educational goals and to then, as mentioned, enter into that career in that profession. Let's now talk about another type of federal loan. This is the Parent Plus loan. Parents, it is possible for you to take out a federal loan to help cover your dependent child's costs. In order to apply for this Plus loan, there are a few steps. First of all, parents, your dependent student will need to complete the FAFSA. As the student completes the FAFSA, the FAFSA will determine if the student is considered dependent or independent. All that means is that a dependent student will need parent information on the application. So for those students who are dependent, as long as the student does the FAFSA, then the parent can apply for the Plus loan. The Plus loan does require a credit check. You will need to pass a review of your credit history in order to receive this Parent Plus loan. And parents, you also will need to sign the master promissory note. You will need to sign off to that legally binding document, so be aware of that. There are a few options if the Parent Plus loan is not a possibility. If you are ineligible for the Plus loan, let's say that you don't pass that credit check, there are some options. First of all, you could apply with a cosigner, so you could have someone else cosign on the loan and try to obtain the Parent Plus loan in that manner. You can appeal the credit decision. That's definitely a possibility. Maybe there's been some fraudulent activity that's still in your credit report. Well, you can basically go through an appeal process and potentially have approval for that Plus loan through that appeal process. And that appeal would be with the federal government, okay? So you'll see instructions about that if you're denied the Plus loan. Finally, parents, if you are denied the Plus loan, then it could be possible for the student to receive additional student loans. So they could receive an additional amount of the federal unsubsidized loan. Just know that there are those options that you may want to consider. Okay, let's get into our first Mountie myth. I know we've already covered quite a bit with the financial aid definition and all of those different types of financial aid. Let's cover the first Mountie myth. Remember, these are things we hear in the financial aid office that oftentimes just aren't true. All right, so here's one that we tend to hear, this assumption that my income, it's too high, I'm not going to receive any grants or scholarships. And this is something that oftentimes is completely false, all right? Or it is false, rather, because there are financial aid options that don't even look at your income. Remember, we talked about the unsubsidized loan that doesn't even look at income. There are scholarships that don't even look at income. I've worked at private colleges that offer institutional grant money that is not at all based on income. It's still worth applying. Applying is 100% free. And remember, there are those financial aid options that aren't based on your income. And you might be surprised, higher income students can still qualify for that need-based financial aid. For example, at Mount SAC, I oftentimes see it. There are families that are making $100,000, $150,000, and they still qualify for that California College Promise Grant. They still can get their classes paid for, and that's going to save you several $100s each semester. So that's a benefit. It's worth applying. Applying is 100% free. So how is it that you apply? Let's now talk about that. We've covered the different financial aid options. Let's discuss more or less how you're applying to receive those financial aid options. It all is going to begin by completing either the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application. You are going to complete one of these applications, the FAFSA or the DREAM Act. FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. By completing the FAFSA, you're applying for federal and state opportunities, and colleges will automatically consider you for those federal and state options. It's very common as well that colleges will use information from that FAFSA to then determine what institutional money, what money they have available, and they will use information from that FAFSA. If FAFSA is not your application, you may want to consider the California DREAM Act application, or it's often called the CADA. The California DREAM Act application is a financial aid application, and this would be an application for state financial aid options. If this is your application, unfortunately, you wouldn't qualify for the federal financial aid options. However, you could still apply and be considered for state financial aid options. As well, the colleges will consider you for institutional financial aid options as well. So it's worth applying, and remember, you're completing one of these applications. Let's talk about which application is right for you. The FAFSA is your application if any of the following statuses apply to you. If you are a U.S. citizen, or if you are what's termed on the FAFSA an eligible non-citizen. Examples of an eligible non-citizen are those who are permanent residents. If you were granted a refugee or asylee status, maybe you're a T visa holder. There are some other statuses that are within that eligible non-citizen definition, and I would refer you to the FAFSA to see if maybe that's you. But if what we've covered is applicable to your situation, then FAFSA is your application. You'll see the webpage there on the top red banner, fafsa.ed.gov. It's really important to apply by March 2nd. Every year, you want to make sure to apply as early as possible, at least though by March 2nd. If you miss that deadline, it's not the end of the world, but you may be limiting your state financial aid options. If you want to best maximize your financial aid options, apply early and no later than March 2nd. On the FAFSA, you will also have the opportunity to include any college, any university that you think you might attend. You can include up to 10 schools. And once again, these are any schools that you might enroll in. If you include a school on the FAFSA, you're not promising to enroll there, but you are letting them know that you're interested in financial aid, and they will then receive your application and will communicate to you what financial aid options you qualify for. On the FAFSA, you can search for each school. As you'll see on the screen, Mount SAC's school code is right there. So feel free to jot that down if needed, but you can search for each school on the application. For those of you working on the FAFSA application, you will want to create what's called a Federal Student Aid ID, the FSA ID. What is that? It's basically a unique username and password. This is going to be something you are going to use every year to apply for financial aid. So make sure to store that somewhere. Make sure to jot that down, save it. But basically, it is a way that you're going to complete the online application. The FSA ID is also a way that the federal government, they authenticate your identity. Okay, so this is unique to you as the student, and parents, if you may also need to create that FSA ID, and I'll touch on that in a few moments. But yes, the FSA ID is something you can create. You'll see the webpage on the screen, fsaid.ed.gov. I recommend all of you, those of you doing the FAFSA, create that ID. You can at least create that first and then get started on that FAFSA later. But get started at least with creating that ID. It's your own username that you create, your own password. Once again, it authenticates your identity, and it's going to serve as your electronic signature. In order to sign the FAFSA, you'll use that ID. Parents, if you're a student, if your child, if they are determined dependent on the FAFSA, that means that parent information is needed. And it does mean that a parent's signature is needed. You will need to sign on the FAFSA. Parents, you will need a social security number to create that FSA ID. But you will create your own FSA ID. It's unique to you. It's separate from the student. And that is the ID that you're going to use every year to sign the FAFSA as long as the student continues to be a dependent student. Parents, if there are some of you who don't have a social security number, that's fine. That's not an issue. However, you will not be able to electronically sign the application. What you will do is you will have the signature page of the FAFSA printed out, and you can then sign the printed signature page, and you will then mail that out to the address provided. Let's now talk about the DREAM Act application. If what we covered with the FAFSA didn't really seem applicable to you, then the DREAM Act application might be your application. This would be your application if any of the following statuses apply to you. If you're undocumented, if you have a valid or expired DACA, if you're a U visa holder, if you were granted a temporary protected status, or if you've been a California resident for some time and you meet requirements for what's called a non-resident exemption. And I know that sounds super technical. I would encourage all of you, if this seems like your application, go to the DREAM Act website. You'll see it on the top red banner, dream.csac.ca.gov. When you get started with the application, you will first have to answer different questions. And those questions will just confirm if DREAM Act is your application. So I would recommend check that out. If FAFSA is not your application, then DREAM Act might very well be your application. Similar to FAFSA, you want to apply by March 2nd. Okay, apply as early as possible, but no later than March 2nd. And similar to FAFSA, you will include up to 10 colleges. Any college that you think is a possibility, include them on your DREAM Act application. Mount SAC's school code is there, and similar to FAFSA, you can also search. So you can type in the school's name, maybe the state or city that the school is in, and you can find the school code through the application. Instead of a federal student aid ID, students, you will create your own user ID. It's just called a user ID, and you will first set that up. So students, you can go to that DREAM Act website, and when you get started on the application, you will then work on creating your user ID. And separate from that, parents, if your student is dependent based on the application, then parents, you will electronically sign the DREAM Act application through what's called a PIN number. So that PIN is a way that you as a parent are connected to the student's application, and that's how you're electronically signing the DREAM Act application. Once the student is done with the DREAM Act application, there is then a prompt that'll walk you through the parent PIN, or you can always just go to the DREAM Act webpage at a later point, and there's a large green button for creating that parent PIN. So it's hard to miss. You'll find it. But keep that in mind. You will need to create that parent PIN. Both applications are available online. Even though these are different applications, they do have some things in common. You can complete them online, so you'll see the web pages there. And I really do recommend complete this online. Processing will happen more quickly, and the online applications actually have a lot of built-in help and features available to guide you through the application. So it's very useful. There is a paper application. You can find a PDF online, but I really recommend do this do this online through the web pages provided. And as mentioned, applying for financial aid is going to happen every year. You want to apply every year for financial aid. October 1st of every year is when the newer application is made available. As of last week, a week ago, October 1st, the newer 2021-2022 application was made available. This is your application if you're going to go to college next school year, okay? If you're going to college starting next fall, 2021, then make sure you're completing that 2021-2022 application. Remember, March 2nd is an important deadline. You have between October 1st to March 2nd, which is about 5 months, so that's more than enough time to complete your application. Let's talk about some documents that you may need to refer to, that you may need to use in order to complete the 2021-2022 FAFSA or DREAM Act. Make sure to have Social Security cards as applicable, permanent resident cards as applicable. The 2021-2022 application will look at income and tax information from 2019. If you filed taxes in 2019, last year, then make sure to have those tax returns readily available so you can refer to. If you were working last year, you will need to report the amount of income you earned from working. So this is 2019 income. Make sure to have those W-2s or other records, maybe 1099s if you were self-employed. Some students and families will need to report information from bank accounts, like a checking and savings account, or certain investments. So make sure you just have those records available just in case you need to refer to them. Also, some students and families will need to report untaxed income from 2019. Examples of untaxed income would be child support received, untaxed IRA distributions, and pension or annuity payments. Once again, as applicable to your situation, just make sure to have these documents so that you can complete the application as accurately as possible, and hopefully all in one sitting, right? You're not having to scramble and stop periodically to find different pieces of information. Let's talk about our second Mountie myth. Something else we tend to hear from students is a concern that because their parents don't have a Social Security number, that they won't qualify for financial aid. And this is absolutely false. Your eligibility is not at all based on your parents having a social. If that is your situation, students, if your parent or maybe both parents don't have a social, that's okay. You're just going to enter all zeros on the application. When the application asks for your parent's social, just put all zeros and you can still move forward, and you can still apply to all of those financial aid options that we've discussed. Let's now talk about common mistakes to avoid. We've spent some time talking about the types of financial aid, how you're applying. Remember, you're doing the FAFSA or DREAM Act application. Now let's talk about how to avoid some errors on that application. All of the responses that you're going to report on the application are going to be used to determine your financial aid eligibility. Because your financial aid eligibility is based on those responses, it's important that everything you enter is accurate and it is correct. If you make mistakes, that could have a huge effect. So let's work through some of these common mistakes. The first one is misreporting of marital status. Both the student and the parent are actually asked about their marital status. Now this question asks as of today. So as of the date that you're working on the FAFSA or DREAM Act, as of today, what is your marital status? So make sure that you're reporting based on what's applicable as of that date. It's not as of the tax year, 2019. It's not as of a few months ago. It's as of the date. So make sure that that is properly reported. Another common mistake is students not having the correct parent or parents on the application. Particularly for those of you students whose parents and parent for financial aid purposes are biological parents or adoptive parents. So students, if you're biological or adoptive parents, if they're not married, or if they're not married and they're not living together, you're going to have to report the parent that you've been living with the most during the last 12 months from the date that you're doing the FAFSA. So if that is your situation, once again, your biological or adoptive parents are not married and they're not living together. If that's your situation, then whenever you're completing the FAFSA, you have to ask yourself, okay, which parent have I been living with the most over the last year? You'll have to choose that specific parent on the application. And then you have to consider if that one parent has remarried. If they have remarried, then you will need step parent information on the application. Another common mistake is misreporting income information. Remember, this is the 2021-2022 application. this is looking at 2019 taxes, all right? So make sure that you're looking at the right tax year. And as well, the income questions, the financial questions, they're actually identical between parents and students. And that means that you really want to be careful to report that information separately. It happens all the time where we get applications where students and parents are making the same amount and their tax information is identical. So don't do that, okay? Don't duplicate that reporting. There's a specific section for student information and a specific section for parent information. Make sure to just carefully work through the application. Another mistake is misreporting asset information. There's a very specific definition of what's considered an asset for financial aid purposes. Remember, the online application has a lot of built-in help. On the application, you'll see that definition. You can access a help and hints feature, and it will provide you information about what's considered an asset. So make sure to look at that. Also, keep in mind that the asset information is as of the date you're working on the financial aid application. It's not the value of your assets from 2019. It's not the value of your assets next quarter. It's as of the date you're working on the application. And examples of assets are the amount of cash you have, the amount in your savings checking accounts, net worth of investments. If you own multiple properties, you would have to report that. You do not have to report your main residence, okay? The main home you're living in, you won't have to report the value of that on the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application. And net worth of businesses and or investment farms. If you have a small business, you don't have to report that business. If you have more than 100 full-time employees, then you will need to report the net worth of that business. Another common mistake is not using what's called the IRS data retrieval tool. This is exclusive to the FAFSA application. For many families, it is possible to actually import your tax information from the IRS database. This is a great way to ensure that the tax information is all accurate, and of course it'll help speed up completing that application because you won't have to answer the different questions. If possible, use that data retrieval tool. If it doesn't work, that's okay. You can then manually report your tax information. Another mistake is incorrectly answering a question about whether you filed IRS Schedule 1. Some of you will see this question: did you file Schedule 1 in 2019? For this question, make sure to answer no if you did not file Schedule 1, okay? So that's pretty self-explanatory. Answer no if you didn't file Schedule 1. Also, there is an option to answer no to this question if the only reason you filed Schedule 1 was to report one or more of the following items: virtual currency, unemployment compensation, educator expenses, IRA deduction, student loan interest deduction, or an Alaska Permanent Fund dividend. Once again, if you didn't file Schedule 1, then you can say no to that question. If the only reason you filed Schedule 1 was to report one or more of those following items, then you can actually answer no. So keep that in mind. And once again, on the application, there's built-in help and guidance. So when you get to that question, you might remember, oh yeah, this is that question I heard about. You can refer to that help and hints feature and just carefully make sure to work through them. Another common mistake is misreporting what's called household size. Household size has a big effect on your financial aid eligibility. For students who are dependent, meaning that parent information is required on that application, the household size is the parent's household size, and you want to make sure to include any person that the parents are financially supporting during specific dates. And the dates are on the screen, and you'll see this on the application too. In other words, don't forget siblings, right? If the siblings are receiving the majority of their support from the parents, you can include other people. If you have cousins, grandparents, if there are other people in the household, as long as those other people are living in the household and receiving the majority of their support from the parents based on that date, include them in the household, okay? Make sure to look at that question carefully. Also, another common mistake is misreporting what's called the number in college. Basically, however many people in the household, if anyone in the household is going to college, make sure to include them in the number in college. Unfortunately, parents are excluded. So dependent students, if you're dependent and you have the parents' household information, unfortunately, you can't include your parents if your parents are going to college. But if you have siblings that are going to college, make sure to include them as long as they're enrolled half-time during the 2021 2022 school year and they're pursuing a degree or certificate. So make sure, once again, to carefully work through these questions. Another common mistake is forgetting to add schools. If the school is not on your application, the school will never know that you're interested in financial aid, and the school won't offer you financial aid options. So keep that in mind. You can include up to 10 schools. It's possible that you can later remove some schools and add more schools if you need to do that. And the last common mistake is forgetting signatures. Signatures are critical to the application. If you as the student, if you don't sign the FAFSA, or if you're a dependent, or if you don't sign the FAFSA or DREAM Act, or if you're a dependent student and your parent doesn't sign the FAFSA or DREAM Act, then schools can't use the application to offer you financial aid. So do not forget those signatures. Remember, for those of you doing the FAFSA, students, you sign with your FSA ID, and parents, if you have an FSA ID, you can electronically sign that application. If you don't have that FSA ID or you don't want to use it, you can print that signature page and make sure to sign the hard copy and mail it out. And for those of you doing the DREAM Act application, remember, parents, you have that PIN number that you're going to use. Okay, so let's now talk about the expected family contribution. All of the responses contained in that FAFSA or DREAM Act are used to calculate a score, all right? Your answers to all of those questions ultimately results in a score, and that score is the expected family contribution. This score is calculated by the financial aid application. The score is not at all how much you have to pay. That's a common misunderstanding. The EFC score is simply a number that dictates what financial aid options and how much you can receive. Schools will use that to determine what options are available. Something to keep in mind is that the EFC, the expected family contribution score, that can change. It is possible that that's going to change. For example, if you ever correct your application, maybe you look at your application after you've already submitted it and you realize, oh man, that's wrong. I made an error there. You can always re-log in and make corrections. Corrections are instances where you made a mistake, where the initial information was just incorrect. So if you make corrections, then the score can change. The score can also change through an appeal process due to special circumstances. We'll talk about this more, but basically, if you've experienced a drastic change in your financial situation, it's possible that you can work with the financial aid offices at each school, and they might allow you to go through an appeal, and that could result in your score changing. And we'll talk more about special circumstances. Lastly, remember, you're applying every year for financial aid. Subsequent financial aid applications are going to look at different tax years, different years in terms of your income. So that means that your score might change. Your score could be lower one year and increase the next year, or vice versa. It could be higher one year and lower the next year. So keep that in mind, that your score can change, and that might mean that your financial aid eligibility for subsequent years changes as well. So let's now briefly talk about special circumstances. Of course, life happens, right? For the student or for the parent, there can be drastic changes in a personal or a financial circumstance that will drastically affect the student or parent's ability to pay towards their education. So financial aid offices realize that, and the good news is that financial aid offices can account for those changes in your situation. Oftentimes, if there's a change in your income, financial aid offices can go through this appeal process. If you've experienced unemployment, maybe reduced work hours, maybe there's been a separation or a divorce, if there's been a drastic change that the FAFSA or DREAM Act just doesn't capture, work with each financial aid office. It's very common that each school will have this process. They might call it differently. Some call it an appeal, some call it professional judgment, some call it a change of income. But make sure to be in contact with each college, with each university, if you have experienced, once again, a drastic change in your situation. Just know that there are options, and this could be a way. It could be a way to increase your financial aid eligibility. Let's now talk about the student aid report, and we're turning a corner, and we're nearing completion of this presentation. I know we've been going at a nice brisk pace, but I want to make sure we have that 20 to 30 minute window for some Q&A. So let's talk about the student aid report. When you've completed the FAFSA or DREAM Act, you will receive a student aid report within 2 to 3 days. Within 2 to 3 days, you'll have access to this report, and this is very useful. This report will provide a summary of all of your responses on the application. Now, why is that important? Well, you can check. You can double check, triple check for errors. So make sure to take a look, make sure everything is accurate. If you see something that's absolutely wrong, As mentioned, you can always re-log in and make a correction. On your student aid report, you'll see your EFC score. So you'll have that score provided, which is useful. And there are comments. There are comments on the student aid report that help you understand if something is wrong with your application. If you forgot a signature, you'll see a comment about that. If you might need to submit additional forms, there are comments that more or less tell you about that. And for those of you doing the FAFSA, the student aid report will provide you a history of your financial aid usage. You will be able to see how much in a Pell Grant you may have received throughout your college career. You can also see how much in federal loans you've borrowed. So that's going to be useful for you, especially during subsequent years. So what happens after you apply? We've spent some time, right, talking about the types of financial aid, how it is that you're applying. We looked at those common mistakes, right, to avoid with the application. We've talked about the student aid report. So it's all been about applying and making sure to check that report, right? But what can you expect afterwards? Let's look at that briefly. So a summary of the process would look as follows. Of course, you're completing the FAFSA or DREAM Act by March 2nd. Complete it by March 2nd. Don't miss that date. You will want to ensure that your GPA information is also submitted. Now, I have some good news here, okay? The state of California does mandate every public high school in California to report GPA information. So this is already taken care of for you, all right? So don't worry about this, but for Cal Grant purposes, for Cal Grant, you want to apply by March 2nd, and you want your GPA sent to the organization that manages Cal Grant by March 2nd. But once again, because you're in a public California high school, for all graduating seniors, this is reported. You want to make sure to look at your student aid report, so make sure to review that, take a look at the comments, make sure all your responses are accurate. And once you submit that application, remember, you're including schools on that application. So if you're receiving any messages, offer letters from those schools, make sure to look at everything. Look at all of that information so you can start determining which school you're going to attend. You know, there are many factors involved with that college decision process, right? But one important piece is, right, the financial piece. What college is offering you, how much money, and ultimately how much each college is going to cost. If colleges, if universities, if they are requesting documents from you, submit those as soon as possible. In order to help with your decision, I'm sure it's useful to have a finalized financial aid offer. Colleges, universities, they can't give you a final offer until you've submitted everything. So if they are requesting information, submit those as soon as possible. And compare your financial aid offers. Once you start seeing those financial aid offers, those financial aid awards, take a look at how much each school is offering you. Try to figure out how much each school will still cost out of pocket, and then you can determine which school is going to be worth it, right? Here's an example how you can compare that information from a financial aid offer to total costs. What you see on the screen is an example of an annual financial aid offer. So this is money available for one whole school year, and this is an example of costs involved for one whole school year, excuse me. As you can see, this student is qualifying for about $10,000. $10,000 of grant money. This is free money from the federal government and state government. They're getting that California College Promise Grant, which pays for tuition. They're getting the federal Pell Grant and the state Cal Grant and Student Success Completion Grant. This is all free money, about $10,000. Compared to the costs at Mount SAC, that's more than enough to pay for those costs. You'll notice this student will calculate their tuition based on our tuition rate. There are some mandatory fees like parking fee, other mandatory fees. And of course, there's textbooks, right? The student would have to plan to pay for textbooks. And those costs will vary, right? There are different strategies involved with getting your textbooks. You can rent, you can get brand new, maybe you can share with a friend or use a library if they have those books available. So those costs will vary, but this is still a very useful exercise. Notice that the difference between the total financial aid offered, the total costs, is $9,000. What this means is that this student has $9,000 that they will receive, and they can use that for textbooks. That means $4,500 in the fall, $4,500 in the spring. That's more than enough for textbooks. The student will probably have enough money to purchase other school supplies, depending on what they need. Maybe they need a newer laptop. Financially, can even help you with housing, can help you with some of those living expenses and even food. All right, so it is worth applying, and you definitely want to compare your financial aid offers, especially to those costs involved at whatever schools you're looking into. let's look at our final Mountie myth. And this is a sentiment that we hear, this notion of I can't apply, the application is just too difficult, I can't do it. And while I understand, I get it, I'm very pleased to say that at Mount SAC, our financial aid department has various resources and opportunities available to our students to help you with the application. So if you're reaching out to us, you're going to get a hold of an expert that can help offer support, that can answer questions. And I definitely want to extend an invitation. At Mount SAC, we want to be a resource to our community, so feel free to reach out to us. If you just have general questions, give us a call. We're happy to help, all right? You don't just have to be a Mount SAC student in order to contact us to get some assistance. And speaking of receiving assistance and opportunities to receive support with the application process, we are very excited to host a Cash for College event. Every fall, every spring semester, we traditionally open our campus and we host a Cash for College event where we literally help you with the application. Of course, with the current state of affairs, right, our campus is closed, so we are offering a Cash for College event virtually. So this is going to occur Saturday, October 17th, and this is a virtual way to receive assistance with your application. Our financial aid team, myself included, we will be there, so we literally will help you with the application. There's various workshops available throughout the day. As mentioned, financial aid experts are going to be there, and we can offer you that assistance. So if you just want to set aside that time, Saturday, October 17th, beginning at 9 a.m., work on the application, complete it so you don't have to think about it. So you can register today. Registration is now open. You'll see you can either go to our financial aid webpage, mountsac.edu/financial aid, or you can, if you have Instagram, we have an Instagram account at @mountsac_FA. And there's a link in our bio, and that'll take you to the registration page. But please do participate in our event. As mentioned, we will help you with the FAFSA with the DREAM Act. So it's a great way just to get that done. But we are hosting different workshops as well, so you can learn more about the scholarship application process. We have a scholarship workshop. We have a workshop for admission. So if you just want to learn, what does it look like to apply to Mount SAC, or maybe you just want to keep Mount SAC as another option, you can just familiarize yourself with what that looks like. And we have a resource fair, so it's another opportunity to see all of the support services made available to our Mount SAC students. So I want to thank you all for your participation. I know that was quite a lot of material to cover. It was a kind of sprint, but I really hope you gained a better understanding about financial aid, about how you can apply for financial aid, and more or less what to expect after you apply. As we learned, there are various options out there. So attending college is absolutely possible. Don't feel like because there are some financial limitations that because of that you shouldn't pursue learning beyond high school. There are many financial aid options. Apply to see what you qualify for. And of course, you can always work with the financial aid offices at each school so that you can gain a better understanding about your eligibility.